Hello, everyone. Well, I hope you've had an amazing morning. The afternoon brings James Taylor. We are so happy to have you here, James. Thank you so much. Well, James Taylor is a materials writer and teacher trainer. He's been nominated for an ELTON Award 3 times, winning for Our Languages, FTD Educação, which was awarded for excellence in course innovation in 2021. He is the project manager of Active English and co founded the Raise Up project, encouraging diversity in ELT materials. He is the leader of BRAZ-TESOL Materials Writing Sing and joint coordinator of IATEFL TDSIG. Thank you so much, James. The floor is yours.
So thank you, Tammy, for that kind introduction. Thank you to everyone for being here. And obviously a big thank you to Tammy and Eduardo for setting up this amazing event, which I feel very honored and touched to have been included in. And I hope you've all made your contribution, and there's still plenty of time. And of course, there's tomorrow, so we can still reach that target. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you today about something I think is a really sort of fundamental aspect of teaching. And so before I get onto that, let's start by thinking about all the different roles that we have as teachers. There's many things that we can do in the classroom. So in the chat, can you type for me some ideas you have of the different roles that teachers can have in the classroom? There are a lot, right? Let's see what you can come up with. Now, I mean, looking at the title, obviously, will suggest at least one. So I know that you're a little bit behind me, so I am just going to go ahead now. Oh, they're coming in now, so I can see some. Okay, so we've got like a psychologist, the teacher, obviously, a facilitator. Yeah, so obviously we have motivator. I think there are lots of different types of roles that are available. Here are just some of the ones that I came up with, but I think there are lots more depending on the type of teaching that we do. In fact, I came across this image the other day, which I think kind of sums it up quite nicely, and how teachers can often be made to feel like they're doing a lot. And I mean, what's really interesting was when I put this slide in, I decided to crop it like this because actually this comes from an American newspaper. So the point they were trying to make, actually, I've cropped out here, but I just thought I'd show you because it's interesting, is that this was the full cartoon. So it, I mean, that's luckily for most of us, that's a dimension that we don't have to consider, but it just gives you an idea of how many things that teachers are expected to do. But obviously in this talk, I want to focus on something a bit more healthy, fortunately, which is the idea of the teacher as a motivator. And for me, this, I think, is one of the most important. I mean, you could even argue maybe the most important, but I would say definitely the top 2 or 3 roles that we have in the classroom, potentially. So I think when we think about this, we have to consider some important questions. So we have to think about, like, how do we define motivation? Well, of course, I could do a whole long talk about how we define motivation, and it's a complex area with lots of study and everything. But just to sort of do a quick version of it for today, I think we can consider motivation through these 2 factors. So integrative motivation, which is the idea that it's based on the desire to participate in a target culture, or to be able to interact with people, to be able to exchange information with people, to be able to participate in a community, which you can interpret in a very broad sense what that community could mean. It could be a big community like you move to a place to live there, but it could also be a community of work. It could be a professional community. It could be many things. So your motivation is to be able to participate in that community, versus an instrumental motivation, which is more goal oriented. And you're not so much, it's not so much about being part of a culture, but having a specific goal that you want to achieve. I think this is quite a useful way of looking at motivation. I was always taught about the sort of internal versus external idea, which is a sort of, I think, slightly more simple version of it. But you could sort of compare integrative motivation to sort of being an internal desire to do something, and then instrumental being more of an external, maybe the idea of I want to do this versus sort of they want me to do this, depending on the context. But I think integrative and instrumental are a little bit more sort of sophisticated in understanding these things. So that's the sort of definition of how we define motivation. Then what about the next question to consider is why are our students studying English? It's a pretty basic question, but often I think we don't actually give it a lot of thought, or we make assumptions. You know, if we don't know why they're there, how can we help them reach their objectives? And I was thinking about when I had Portuguese classes years and years ago, and I remember being very aware of this, because my objective was pretty informal. I just wanted to be a bit better. I needed to be able to speak with my Brazilian family a bit better, and to be able to sort of survive in the world. But I wasn't living in Brazil at the time, so it wasn't like I had this desperate need to be. It was just a kind of, oh, I want to stay in touch with the language and try and improve a bit. And in the same class of 10 students, there was another person who was an international interpreter, and she could already speak kind of like French and English and Spanish and maybe some other languages, and she wanted to add Portuguese to her kind of suite of languages that she could offer professionally. And so her expectations of what she wanted to achieve was so different from mine. And as a teacher, you have to be aware of these things, and how you approach the lesson, and how you approach the students, like what kind of feedback is useful, things like this. And our teacher never asked that question. So her need for, you know, sort of accuracy was much greater than mine. You know, I didn't need everything to be corrected, like really definitely. I didn't need my pronunciation to be absolutely perfect. I didn't, you know, it's like, oh, I'm okay. This is good enough. It's fine. But she had higher standards. But without asking, how are you going to know? You know, so you have to start thinking about this in the first place. I mean, obviously, there's only so much we can do within a class, but if we're not aware of it, then we can't do anything in the class. Okay, so the next question to consider then is, what are we motivating them to do? There are many different things that we could be motivating them to do. It could include things like like these, you know, so sort of classroom management stuff, like trying to stop them from speaking Portuguese all the time, if that's the case, or trying to make sure that we get them to turn up to lessons, be on time, do their homework, stuff like that. But then there's also more sort of meta cognitive things, you know, being aware of their learning process, taking responsibility for it, being a good classmate, and you know, and then practical things they could do, like, you know, reading English books, or other activities that they can do that would help them. And then making it very broad, and like being curious and engaged in the lessons. Like, is that the kind of thing that we are required to do to motivate them to do? I think so. And I also put like managing their expectations, helping them to have expectations, but to be realistic about what they're able to do. So there's a lot of, and there'll be plenty of other examples that you could think of, possibilities. So that's another factor that we have to consider. So you could kind of say probably that there are two different types of learner, really, if we're going to be very broad. I mean, they're not, but let's say let's do that, right? Let's just divide them into two different types of this. So this photo is an idiom in English. If you know what that idiom is, you can type it into the chat now, which idiom I'm trying to say while I have a sip of my tea. Unlike Cecilia, I love tea. It's a cliche, but it's true. So this expression is you could lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, of course. Right? So I like to think of this as just having ability and talent is not enough to be successful in things. You can think about this in life in general. Right? The idea that just because you're really talented, if you don't work hard, then it's unlikely it's very unlikely that you're such a genius that you're going to get everything that you want. So we can have students that are more than capable of achieving what they want to achieve, but if they don't have the motivation to do the work, they won't progress the way they should. Now, of course, lacking motivation doesn't always mean that they're lazy, which could be suggested here. That's not the only reason. They may have confidence issues. They may have had bad experiences in the past. But for whatever reason, we have to get them to do the work. The other type of learner here is in this picture. It's a famous song by this singer. I don't know if any of you know it. It's a very good song from a very good film. So Jimmy Cliff, one of his biggest hit songs was called You Can Get It If You Really Want. And I like to think of these as the kind of very motivated individuals who are perhaps not necessarily the most talented or the best students. They don't have necessarily they're not the most gifted, but because of their motivation, they work really, really hard. And they can achieve what they want to achieve, even though they're not as gifted as the people in the horse metaphor. So we've got these possible like two types of students, and then we have to think about what it is that we have to do to help motivate them achieve their objectives. So here we are, our poor brains have got to keep all of this in mind, along with all the other things that we have to do when we're trying to think about motivating them. So as we've said, our role in the classroom, what is our role in this? Because it's not going to be the same in every class. What is our role in this classroom? Why are they studying English? Why are they here? Right? And our students' motivation. And what is it that we're motivating them to do? And then there are other factors as well, of course, external factors which can affect these things. The expectations of other stakeholders, like parents and the institution where you work, the curriculum, the national situation, their history as a learner, what they've experienced before they had lessons with you. It could be your own experiences with what you're teaching now and what you've observed, what has worked and what doesn't work. These could all have positive or negative effects, but they're all things that we have to kind of keep in mind when we're considering this idea of motivation. So no one said it was easy. That's just the way it is. But there is help at hand, and that's what I want to talk about for the rest of the talk. So this is a list from a research paper, and I'm not an academic, so I'm not in the habit of reading research papers all the time. But this was a research paper that I read quite a few years ago. And I hadn't been a teacher very long when I don't know how I came across it, but I read it somehow. Called The 10 Commandments for Motivating Language Learners, the results of an empirical study by Zoltan Dörnyei and Csizér, published in 1998. And you can see how important this was to me, that I read that and I took the list of their 10 commandments and I typed it up and I laminated it so that I could put it on my cubicle at the school where I worked. I put it in front of me there so I could see it every day, because I thought it was such a useful and influential and accessible list of things to remember that we can do as a teacher. Because obviously we're talking about motivation here, but I think these things permeate throughout everything that you do. So I took this photo a couple of days ago, which is why it looks a bit sort of dirty and beaten up, because I've been carrying it around for like nearly 15 years, I guess, something like that. But I don't have it on my wall here in my home office. That would be a bit strange, but I still have it over there on the shelves behind me. So let's take a look at this list in a bit closer detail and talk about how important they are when it comes to motivating learners. So then the first one is setting a personal example with your own behavior. I love this because I think it really sets the tone for everything. And I think it actually could set the tone for your entire like professional behavior for everything that you do and how you operate your career. No, don't be scared about making sure that students are aware of the work that you do for them, so that they know that you're working hard and that you care about them. I mean, simple things like this: if you make a handout for them, put at the top of that handout in the header, created by, and your name next to it, so they can see this is not just a thing you found lying around on the internet, but it's a thing that you actually created for them. Put your name on it so that they realize that you're doing this kind of work for them. If they ask you a question that you can't answer, make a point of making a note of it and getting back to them later on, whether you follow up with a message or an email or something later on, or you speak to them in the next lesson. That's professionalism, right? That's setting a personal example that they can follow. Basic stuff, you know, being on time, working hard. I mean, these sound like basic, obvious things, but if you've worked in schools, you will know that not every teacher does this stuff, and it matters, right? It really makes a difference. And then finally, don't ask them to do things you're not prepared to do yourself. Okay, I'm quite an introverted character. There's certain things that I wouldn't do as a language student that if I've had that situation where teachers are like, okay, now we're going to do this, and I'm like, you might be, I'm not. I don't ask my students to do those things because I'm not prepared to do them, even if they would. I don't want to put them in that situation. So think about this idea. Yeah, think about what it means to be a role model. A role model is a complex thing. So think about how much of a role model I need to be. How much of a role model do adults need? Is it a bit more subtle than just I'm a role model? I think so. And what is it that you need to be an example of with this particular class? Okay, next. Number 2, create a pleasant and relaxed atmosphere in the classroom. Very interesting, because I think, you know, bearing in mind when this paper was published, 1998, you know, I think that this would have been more controversial then than it would be now. It'd still be some people who would find this a bit sort of too modern, but not many. But I think that, you know, when we define pleasant and relaxed, you know, there's two possibilities here. That you can either be someone who has, I think our first reaction is you have to sort of lighten up, right? Okay, lighten up a bit, relax, be open, you know, don't be so sort of top down with the students, be a bit more collaborative and all that kind of thing. I also think that there is a possibility that there's maybe some teachers who are perhaps too open and light and think about having fun too much, and perhaps need to make it a bit more sort of an environment which is more conducive to, like, okay, we're learning here, we're not just hanging out, right? So that is also a possibility. So how do you get the balance between sort of fun and study work, right? Because we need a bit of both, and that's something we always have to think about in our teaching, and think about how do you create this atmosphere, this pleasant and relaxed atmosphere in the classroom. How does that work? What is it that you need to do? It will depend on a lot of different factors where you are. Okay, number 3, present the tasks properly. it's an interesting thing to think about, right? But like we don't usually talk about the presentation of tasks as being a motivating factor. But then when I started to think about this, preparing this, I thought, yeah, I remember when I wasn't that experienced as a teacher, and you present the task and you don't do a very good job of presenting it, and you see the kind of lights in the students' eyes just die out because they're like, oh, I don't know what's going on. I don't know, or I don't even know what this is. I'm sure you've been there. And that is very demotivating. They just sort of deflate and they're like, now, if that was a recurring problem that kept happening over and over again, it's going to be very demotivating for the learners. So really focusing on that aspect of teaching, I think, is very important. Okay, next, develop a good relationship with the learners. So what kind of relationship do you have with the learners? And that relationship is so context dependent. Okay, I've taught groups of 11-year-olds, and I've taught 60-year-old businessmen one-to-one. It's a completely, like, my role in that classroom there is completely different, right? So with the one-to-one business people, we can be like friends. You know, we can be friends, colleagues, collaborators. That's appropriate. I think that's an appropriate thing to do, and it's a very good way of building rapport. But when you're teaching the young learners, teenagers, or even groups of adults, it's a little bit different, depending on the context. So think, what's the best way for me to build rapport? And it may be rapport between you and them, but also rapport for them with each other as well. But it's difficult to do any of those things if you're not sort of open to learning about their lives and engaging with them and like talking to them as normal human beings. Okay, next one. Increase the learner's linguistic self-confidence. This is a more difficult one, I think, to do. But you know, confidence isn't about ability; it's about the perception of your ability. So it's about how do you have good self-awareness about what your strengths and weaknesses are. And so if you are able to rationally, calmly identify, okay, this is something I'm not so good at, and then mitigate that the best you can and try and use that as a student, then that's a sort of healthy way of having a kind of you're sort of confidently dealing with your weakness. But if you're just like, it just gets you down and you just think, oh, I just can't do this, I'm useless, then that lack of confidence is very harmful. So trying to help the students understand that we all have strengths and weaknesses, and that mistakes are a part of the process, and making them identify what they can do to help sort of mitigate those issues when they come up, or where they can put a bit of extra focus in their own time, is very, very helpful, and can help them, not just help motivate them, but make sure they don't lose motivation as well. Okay, make the language classes interesting. You would hope that that would be something that we'd all try to do. But again, if you've worked in places, I think I've certainly worked with teachers who are not that bothered if their lessons are that interesting or not. They're like, this is what I'm teaching. This is what I have to do. This is my job. My job is to teach pages, 62 and 63 today. And that's what I have to do. If it's interesting or not, well, that's not my problem. I've definitely worked with people like that. As a materials writer, I always find this super interesting, this idea of what is interesting. If you've got 25 students in a classroom, how can every lesson be interesting for all of them? I don't think it can. So I would say that you can just try to make it potentially interesting to maybe a majority of the students, and that all of the students at some point will be interested. But you can't guarantee that they will all be interested all of the time. I think we have to be realistic about that. But we should be able to tap into their interests, bring things which they will find interesting, and yeah, give them time to talk about the things that they're passionate about, and don't just sort of pay lip service to it and then go, okay, we've got to move on to grammar. Okay, next one is about promoting learner autonomy. So they need to be able to take responsibility for their learning. They need to understand that you can't learn for them, and you need to have it kind of clearly defined about what you're responsible for and what they're responsible for. And then your job then is to provide support for those things so that they can do them to the best of their ability. And you're not just kind of cutting them loose, going, okay, off you go, not my problem, but you're supporting them. But at the end of the day, it is their responsibility to do those things. Like the idea of, keep giving them doors to walk through. Okay. So say, here's a thing that you could do, right? It's not, here's the thing I'm going to do for you, but here's a thing that you could do, but you're giving them things they could do. Don't just sort of say, look, I'm responsible for this 1 hour here, and the rest of it's up to you. But help them understand what they can do, and what you can do for them. Personalizing the learning process is, again, it's very attractive, but I acknowledge that it's difficult if you've got big classes of many different students, that it's not always easy to manage all of the different sort of needs and goals within a group. But at the very least, we can be aware of that situation and do what we can. And, it is possible to sort of say, this thing that we're doing here, well, this is good for you because you're interested in or focused in on this, and you're interested in focusing on this, and it may be for two different reasons, but it's true for both of them. And also be open to feedback as well, of course, like let them give you feedback on things, so that you can learn and adapt what you're doing in order to make it better for the future. 9 is increasing the learner's goal-orientedness. I was always a big fan of when it was possible, doing a very specific lesson about setting goals for this course, for this semester, whatever was appropriate for that group. Like very deliberately do a whole lesson where we went through about what makes a good goal, setting goals. If you've ever seen the sort of SMART goals thing, doing all of that stuff. I actually have a complete lesson that I created on my blog that people can download if they want to do that. But doing things like, writing the goals out, putting them up on the wall, and then getting them to refer back to them throughout the course so they can remind them, this is what you wanted to do. You said you were going to do this every week. Have you been doing it? I think that's really, really helpful and really motivating to have these very tangible, realistic goals that they can try to achieve. And then the final one is to familiarize learners with the target language culture. It's a very interesting one, this, because I think we can sort of interpret this as sort of being the target language culture as being like, written in America. But I don't actually think that's how we should. I think maybe that what people would have done in the past, but I don't think that's actually necessarily what the target language culture is. I think I would define this culture as the places and communities in which English is being used. So if English is being used as a lingua franca between people of different nationalities, that is the target language culture. So I don't think this goes against what we've been very good at in the last few years, and we need to be better at, is diversifying the range of voices that students have access to. That is the target language culture. And so making them interested in how the language is being used around the world, it should be motivating for them to understand what it is that they're going to get by reaching their objectives in English. So in summary, I just wanted to say, I think that there's a lot of very fundamental aspects of teaching that are covered by this list, which I think is really interesting. I think in a way, by aiming to motivate our our students, if we actually successfully achieve these things, we will kind of end up achieving a lot of other objectives that we should be aiming for as language teachers. So I want you to take these ideas back to your classroom with you and use them as reflections on your teaching practice. Think about these aspects when you're thinking about lessons and how whether they went well or didn't go so well. And if you're teaching, if you're speaking to other teachers, training teachers, then I think that these are very, very useful concepts to introduce to them to help them to develop to the maximum of their capabilities. So that paper, if you want to read it, I had to dig around a bit online to find it. But if you do want to download the original research paper, you can find it at the link there at the top, the bit.ly link. And then the rest of the links there are all ways you can stay in touch with me. Thank you for being here. And thank you to Tammy and Eduardo again for this amazing event.
Hi, James. We're back. Thank you very much.
It's okay. Sorry if I surprised you there.
No, not at all. It's fine. Thank you very much for your time, for your participation, for your help, sharing the event with IATEFL members as well. I saw that on the TDSIG page yesterday. So thank you very, very much. I have no words to describe how grateful we are to you and to all the speakers who joined us today.